good evening. I'm Susan Sadeka. I'm currently the Vice President of the Friends of Baxter Memorial Library, the group that's sponsoring this event. First, I'd like to thank the library staff. Up here we have Julia, who is the Public Service Librarian, Poisington, and James Rathbun, who is the Library Director, is in the back waving. Thank you for your help with this. Actually, they did a lot more of this than any of us did. So, tonight's guest author is Holm, who resides in Portland with his wife. He's the author of the Collector Trilogy, which blends crime and fantasy, and also the Michael Hendricks thrillers, which have won quite a few awards. I'm going to just give you a couple of them. So his first one is The Killing Kind, and it was named the New York Times Editor's Choice, the Boston Globe Best Book of 2015, Strand Magazine's #1 book of 2015, and it won the 2016 prestigious Anthony Award for Best Novel, and that's among mystery authors. And his second one is Red Right Hand, which also won the Boston Globe Best Book of 2016 and was nominated for the 2017 Anthony Award for Best Novel. So on behalf of the Gorham Friends, I'd like to let you know that we do have volunteer information on the circulation desk back there right next to Kermit. We're always looking for new members. You can see that there's a lot of things that we do, and you don't even have to attend a meeting, but we'd love to have you be part of the Friends group. And help yourself to refreshments afterwards. Chris is going to stick around and sign autographs. The bookworm is in the back with book copies of both of those books if you'd like to purchase one. So without any more, I'll introduce Chris. Thank you.
And if you get a chance, vote for the Pete Diorama contest.
The people of your choice.
So, as a writer, I'm better on the page than I am in person, but I'm not used to being upstaged by inanimate objects. These Pete dioramas are incredible. One of them features a book titled Red Right Peep, which just made my day. So even if I crash and burn tonight, I will carry that memory with me forever. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming out and spending your evening with me. And thanks, of course, to the Baxter Memorial Library, which is a terrific library. And I always love library gigs. I think they're a little more laid back than bookstore gigs, and they invariably are an amazing setting. So thank you so much. So you heard a little bit about my books. My collector books came out on a very small press. They're now currently out of print. They blended crime and fantasy. They wound up on over 40 year's best lists, which was great. It means all 40 people who read them really enjoyed them. But my breakthrough books, the ones that really put me on the map, were the Michael Hendricks thrillers. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the genesis of that series and how I got from no publications to small press publications to where I am right now. I should say, you know, I've been very fortunate that I'm doing this full time now. I have some former coworkers in the audience. I think she's misremembering the quality of my work if she's booing that I left, honestly. But in many ways, this series changed my life. Winning the Anthony Award, which may sound made up to some of you, I promise it's an actual award, was a huge honor, and being nominated a second year in a row, even if I lost to Canadian author Louise Penny in Canada while she was the Canadian guest of honor at the conference. So I kind of feel as though that might have been rigged a little bit. Never mind that she's a terrific writer and an international bestseller. So, Michael Hendricks, who is this guy and where did he come from? Well, when we first meet him in The Killing Kind, Michael Hendricks kills people for money. But that aside, he's not that bad a guy.
Really?
He was once a covert operative for a false flag unit of the U.S. military. He was presumed dead when his unit hit an IED, and now he makes his living back home hitting hitmen. Everybody who cared about him before he left thinks he's dead, and he's a guy who he's not a sociopath in any true sense. He's a kid who came up rough through the foster system. Enlisted in the military early, found out he had an aptitude for killing, if not necessarily a stomach for it, and now he's trying to redeem himself, but the only real tools he has at his disposal are violence. And I sort of conceived of this character as a bit of an antidote to this idea of sort of the noble savage, the good guy with a gun, because we have these characters in fiction, and I'm thinking of Jack Reacher, and I'm thinking of Jack Bauer from 24. They're all named Jack. Why are they all Jacks? But there are these guys who they solve their problems through violence, right? And they're basically knights errant. They're these unerring heroes. But if you look at the sort of destruction that they leave in their wake, they're essentially serial killers, right? Like they kill an awful lot of folks, and they come out of that unscathed. Now I love those stories. I think 24 is a blast. I think Reacher is so much fun. But to me, I wanted to write a story that was the flip side of that coin. I wanted to write about a real life character and what that sort of life of violence would do to a guy. And so what I wanted to write was a story where this guy's soul maybe hangs in the balance, and he wants to redeem himself, and he doesn't know how. And part of the reason I write this series is because I don't know whether he can be redeemed. I will say, I don't think he's going to redeem himself by killing people, whether they're good guys or bad guys, but that's part of the inherent tension of the character. So the collector books had a lot of fantasy to them. They actually were, they recast the battle between heaven and hell as old-fashioned crime pulp. So if you imagine, like, demons running speakeasies and angels driving Crown Vics, that kind of gets you in the right headspace. Whereas these books are just straight-ahead thrillers. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I made that transition, and it turns out it was almost entirely by accident. So I'm not sure where exactly the idea for the Hendrix books first came from, but I know exactly when it happened. It was a Sunday night in early 2010, and I was lying in bed with a scene running through my head. As I doze off, I often kind of play out fiction scenes. I read a lot of short stories. Sometimes they end up as short stories, sometimes they end up a book, sometimes they end up nothing. One of my favorite stand-up comics is a guy by the name of Mitch Hedberg, the late, great Mitch Hedberg. And he said, I don't like keeping a pen and paper near my bed, so when I have an idea for a joke in the middle of the night, I either have to get up to write it, or I need to convince myself it ain't that funny. And I do the same thing. I don't actually keep a pen and paper by my bed, because I've noticed if I do, I write down really stupid ideas. And so I kind of feel like I want an idea so good it makes me get up to write it down. So as I was dozing off, this scene was playing in my head of a town square in this nameless banana republic. And there's a political rally that's going on. And this despot who just won a sham election is stepping up to a podium a lot like this one in a well-pressed paramilitary fatigues to deliver a speech. And the entire scene in my head was playing out from the point of view of a sniper several stories above, watching this all, and eyeing this petty despot through the sight of his rifle. And at the time, I was like, okay, this is interesting, but it's not anything I haven't seen before, right? I didn't feel like I had to leap up and write that down. But I remember the guy was calm, he was collected, and he was sort of narrating this scene in my head. I hear all my stories, whether I end up writing in the first person or the third person. Everything I hear is a voice talking to me. So I was hearing this character's voice. And he talked about sighting his target and squeezing the trigger with 3 pounds pressure, no more, no less. And then a crack of gunfire echoes through the square. I don't know if it's because I was dozing off. I don't know where the story ideas tend to come from. Your subconscious does strange things, but I think it might have been because I was tipping to sleep that something unexpected happened. He wasn't aiming at the guy behind the podium. He was aiming at a man in the crowd who was there to kill that guy. And the second that happened, I sat bolt upright in bed and thought, I need to write down everything about that I can remember, because that's fascinating. I didn't know who this guy was or why he would have done that, but I knew I needed to find out. And so I ran downstairs, I wrote down everything I could remember about that scene before it faded. But at the time, I didn't have time to work on it. I had just landed an agent. She was shopping my first novel around. I was working on a second novel in that series. I also had a full-time job. So I had to put that on the back burner. I was like, man, as much as I wish I could work on that, I just can't do it. I don't have the bandwidth. And as they say, be careful what you wish for. Writers don't often talk about their day jobs, but the fact is I wrote my first 4 novels, in fact, with a day job. I'm a scientist by trade. At one point in my life, I actually wanted to be one of those bug hunters that the CDC sends into exotic locations to, chase outbreaks of Ebola. My wife was thrilled, as you can imagine. And I was serious enough about it that I actually was in a PhD program at the University of Virginia for microbiology, infectious disease research. But it wasn't for me. It was the sort of thing that demanded every moment of your time. And I had other interests. I wanted to write a book one day. It wasn't the only thing I wanted to do. And so, at my wife's urging, I dropped out. I got a job on the Portland waterfront for a small biotech startup, and I started writing. 9 years later, that company folded when the economy tanked. And for the first time since I was old enough to work, I didn't have a job. I do, however, have a soundtrack. That's and I went out of my mind. There's only so much time you can work on the job search, so you spend a lot of time at home staring at the walls, talking to the cats. And so when a buddy of mine, a guy by the name of Steve Weddle, who wrote a terrific novel and stories called Country Hardball, which the New York Times called downright dazzling, and I feel contractually obligated to bring up that the New York Times called him downright dazzling every time I mention Steve. He said, there's a lot of online fiction these days, and that's been great. It's like a new pulp era where these people are writing short fiction for online magazines. He said, but I miss that long form short fiction that you only get in a print magazine, the sort of thing you don't want to read on a screen. He said, so I want to launch a magazine. And he said, I'm going to need some longer stories to populate it. I'd love for you to write one. I was like, sure, I'm not doing anything else. He said, well, I can't pay you. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. And he said, probably nobody will read it. I was like, great. What's not to like? So I pitched him a couple of ideas. One of them was going to come in around 3,000 words. It was an idea that I could wrap my entire head around. And in as much as I was known for anything at the time, with 10, 15 short stories out, that was the sort of thing I was known for. But then I pitched him this other idea, the idea that woke me up. And I was like, I don't know what that scene was about, but I do know that I'm intrigued by it. I was like, it's a little wild and woolly. I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. I'm not sure if it's going to turn out. In fact, it's probably a terrible idea for me to write it. So of course, that was the one that he wanted. And since I had nothing better to do, I decided that I would tackle that. I actually went to the Starbucks on Forest Avenue just to get out of my house, and I sat down for a few days in a row and banged it out. I'm a really slow writer, but that story wrote quick. I think I wrote it in the span of a week. And it ended up 11,000 words, which is more a novella than a short story. So I sent it in, and the magazine hadn't even come out yet, so I didn't even know if it ever would, or if anyone would read it. But I figured, hey, what the hell? I give it a shot. I have never been happier to be wrong about how many people would see that, because as it turns out, that short story got nominated for an Anthony Award, and it was selected by Otto Penzler and Harlan Coben to appear in the Best American Mysteries 2011, I want to say. Which was huge for me because I was a relative unknown, and that was a big get, especially because I was in such a small magazine. It boosted my profile a ton. And my agent at the time was so excited by that, she was like, you should turn that into a novel, which was weird because she never said anything to me for any reason. But I was like, okay, maybe she's onto something. She's like, that I can sell, which didn't make me feel great about the book she was shopping at the time. But for highfalutin artistic reasons, I was like, I don't know. I feel like I've told that story. I've said all I need to say. Then I woke up one morning and thought, son of a, I realized how to actually make that story into a book that I wanted to write. And the way to do it was, the short story was very claustrophobic. It was told in the first person, all from this hitman's perspective. And I thought, if I switch that to a third person narrative, I can kind of pull back the camera and show the entire world that he inhabits, right? The guys that he's hunting, the organization he runs afoul of that decides they want to put him in the ground, the FBI agent who's trying to catch all of those people. It was an interesting milieu. There were all these characters that sounded fascinating to me, especially because I'm somebody who likes a good anti-hero. You know, some of my favorite characters are not the nicest people. I'm thinking Richard Stark's Parker books, my all-time favorite crime series. Parker is a thief, and he's no gentleman thief. He's a thug, but he's riveting. And I think, you know, one thing that I really wanted to do was write a story in which bad guy and antagonist weren't necessarily the same thing. I'm thinking of the Harrison Ford version of The Fugitive, right? Tommy Lee Jones is the antagonist in that story, but he's an ostensibly good guy. He thinks he's justified in his actions. He's trying to bring in a murderer. I thought, well, it'd be fun to write from a bad guy's perspective, somebody who kills people for a living, and have an FBI agent who's, you know, chasing him down. But as that was happening, we ended up selling my collector books, which was great. The first two of them sold to a small publisher in the UK called Angry Robot. And, you know, so I started working on a third in that series. I started doing press for that. But every time I had a break, I would chip away at this Hitman novel, because I really thought maybe this is my one big idea. My agent sure thought so. When I was finally happy with the book, I sent it off to my agent. It was actually after I finished the second collector book. I sent it to her. And she promptly sat on it for 7 months without reading it. And then in early 2013, I got kind of a rude awakening. My tiny, tiny publisher that nobody at the time had ever heard of decided they didn't want a fourth book in my collector series. Which, publishing is a business, and I understand that. I was disappointed. I was especially disappointed that I found that out in the promotional materials for the third book. That referred to the third book as the thrilling conclusion of the Brilliant Collector trilogy, and I thought, well, I guess it's nice that it's brilliant. But I was unaware that it was a conclusion or that I was writing a trilogy. And I might have ended that book a little differently if I had known. And then the other thing that happened was my agent finally got around to reading this Hitman novel that she'd been hectoring me to write. And to put it mildly, she hated it. She hated everything about it. She hated the protagonist. She hated the antagonist. She hated so much about it that I wondered if she had actually read the short story that she was telling me to adapt, because it was a fairly straight adaptation. And although we had been together for, I think, 6 or 7 years at that point, I was like, man, I feel like I've got something here, and she doesn't believe in it, and this is what I want to work on. And so we decided to part ways. More me deciding than her deciding, although I don't know what she would have done with me as a client if she didn't actually like my books. So in the span of a couple of months, I went from having 3 books out in a critically acclaimed series to having no publisher and no agent. And I was forced to wonder, had I just blown up my career? You know, this is a lonely business sometimes. And thankfully, my wife is also a writer. She's a reviewer for a number of mystery outlets and reads more than any 10 other people. And so I can talk these things out with her. She's read my books and is my first editor in all things, which you might think she's biased, but as I told her with the first one, if you pretend to like this, I'm going to start showing it to other people. So you'd best be honest or I'm going to embarrass us both. So I felt like I had something, but I was absolutely nowhere. There was nothing for me to do but polish up the manuscript and start querying agents again. The response from that was astonishing, honestly. I think I went out to 10 agents. I think within a week, half of them had requested the full manuscript. including my pie in the sky. And by the way, the first agent search, I think I went out to about 100 agents and had 2 total requests for the full manuscript. And I think I picked the wrong one of those 2 between you and me. But my pie in the sky top choice, this guy by the name of David Gerner, wrote me within 24 hours of sending him an email and said, I want to see the rest of this. David Gerner, he runs a firm called the Gerner Company. But before that, he was the executive editor at Doubleday. Before that, he was an associate editor at Doubleday when he plucked a novel called The Firm out of the slush pile. He was John Grisham's editor for his first run of books, for that amazing run of terrific thrillers that sort of redefined the modern thriller. And then when John's agent passed away suddenly, he called David and said, I'm going to need a new agent. And David said, I can get you a list of some good guys. He said, I have a list, it's you. You want to be my agent? And David said, can I take on other clients? He said, yeah, sure. So when this guy says, your thriller might be something, you know, you get a little charge. So I sent him the manuscript, and I think he read it in 10 days. And again, my previous agent, 7 months, and I was her client. The funny thing about querying agents is they don't work for you unless you sign with them. So he was reading me for free. This guy has other things he could be doing, and he was choosing to read me. Which is why it stung when he wrote back and said, this is good, but it's not where it needs to be, so I'm going to have to pass. He said, not for nothing. I had some thoughts about it, though. So I've attached some notes. And when he said he'd attached some notes, he attached 6 single-spaced pages of notes on my book, which was more than I had gotten in my entire career from everybody I had worked with, short stories, 3 books, my agent, my editors. I had never gotten that many notes. And of course, every writer is this weird cocktail of like ego and fragility, right? We're completely insecure and also absolutely convinced that our precious, deathless prose should never be touched. So I opened it with trepidation, thinking like, this is gonna, he's just gonna be an idiot. There can't be that much that needs changing. And I started reading and cursing at myself because all of his ideas were so ridiculously good. He put his finger on everything that I had chickened out on, every moment that I pulled back. And I thought, man, I can't not take these notes. I'm gonna take another crack at this guy. And so I think over the course of a month, it was a weird month. I was working at IDEX at the time. I was doing my 6 Sigma training, so I was going from like getting my head filled with statistics in the day and then crash editing my novel at night. At the end of that month or so, I sent it back to him. I think he was surprised to hear from me again. I think he thought he'd scare me away forever. And he read it, and he said, you know, it's getting better. I think it just needs one more draft. I didn't know it at the time. David thinks every book needs one more draft, and when you give him the book again, he thinks that that book needs one more draft. But thank God he didn't tell me that, or I probably never would have jumped in and done that one more draft. We went back and forth a while, until eventually somebody showed an interest in one of my other manuscripts, and I mentioned it to him, thinking it might nudge him along. And he said, well, tell you what, tell them that manuscript is no longer on the market. Tell them that I am your agent, and that if they would like a manuscript, they can come to me. So that is how I ended up with David as my agent. And we actually worked on the book in secret for so long that I thought I was like his side piece that he didn't want to admit to people he was dating. Because I was like, when can I go public that I signed with you? He's like, well, let's not put the cart before the horse here. And eventually I came to realize that this is his strategy with all things. We workshopped the book for months after I signed with him until it was exactly where he wanted it. And then, right before, I think it was the German Book Fair, which is like the big European book festival every year, he sent it to like 10 of his favorite editors so that they would all be reading it on the plane together and like eyeing each other and saying, well, what are you looking at? Within, I think he sent it out on a Friday. In fact, we had just gotten back, it was this time of year, it was right now my wife and I are missing Left Coast Crime, which is in Reno this year. It's every spring. And I had been going around and around with David, sending him these drafts. And it was always one more draft. And I remember we landed it on a Wednesday or a Thursday. Was it a Monday? Gosh. And I had an email from David saying, I think it's good. We're going to go out with it this week. And I think by Friday he sent it out to some people, and by Monday we had offers, including with Holm Books, who now publishes me, which scared the crap out of me. They published some of my heroes. They published Daniel Woodrell, they published Mosley, they published Lawrence Block, like they published J.K. Rowling's crime novels. They're huge. And I guess all that work paid off because The Killing Kind made a pretty good splash. It was nominated for a whole bunch of awards. It won a major award. The New York Times called it the best thriller of the fall, which I thought my publicist had made up when she was reading me that. I was actually this is true, I was at a signing at the World Mystery Convention. I'm sitting next to David Morrell, the man who created Rambo. And he's got this line of people at the door. And I have 0 people in my line. And the publicist for my publisher was sort of babysitting me because, as I've discovered, publishers don't think writers are capable of doing anything for themselves, and they're probably right. So they send these babysitters to follow you around and make sure you show up and have pants on and things like that. So she's standing next to me and she gets this email, and she's looking at her phone. She said, "Oh look, Chris just got a rave in the New York Times." And I was like, "Sabrina, you don't have to do that. Like, you stop making things up." And she was like, "No, seriously." And she starts reading it. And then David Morrell gets up and he says, "Excuse me, did you say that was from the New York Times?" She said, "Yes, I did." He took the review and started reading it to his line. And people started sliding over mine, which was pretty much a perfect experience. He actually gave me his business card, which he signed after that, and it's the greatest business card I've ever seen because it's him arm in arm with Sylvester Stallone. I need a business card with me arm in arm with Sylvester Stallone, but I digress. The problem was that book blew up huge at the time when I was starting to figure out what my next book was. I didn't think it was going to be another Hendricks book. I thought I was going to write a standalone thriller. My contract said I could write a standalone thriller, but when the buzz started coming in for The Killing Kind, my editor started making noises about, like, maybe you want to write a sequel to that, which, given that my last series had been canceled because nobody read it, I was like, well, maybe I should consider writing a sequel to that. But I have this fear of repeating myself. I never want to write the same book twice, right? I didn't want to write The Killing Kind 2 and make it like an episode of the week sort of thing, because that's diminishing returns. You might coast on it for a couple of books, but eventually your readers are going to get bored. So I was like, I need to find something that fits within the framework of this character, but can be a completely different kind of story, to keep me interested and to keep the audience interested. And so if the first one was a hitman thriller, about a hitman who hits other hitmen only to wind up a target himself, what's the next one going to be? And so I decided what I wanted to do was draw on some things that fascinated me. I wanted to make a conspiracy thriller. I'm fascinated by conspiracy fiction. I think first of all, as a writer, all humans are sort of prone to pattern recognition, and never more so than writers. We're always connecting the dots and finding the secret story. So it's kind of a way to indulge your inner schizophrenic without actually being hospitalized, which is nice. But I wanted to look at sort of a conspiracy thriller that explored the way information spreads these days, right? News has become viral, which I think is really, really interesting. I wanted to explore some of the negative consequences of viral fame. I wanted to look at, one of the things that I was fixated on is somebody who writes thrillers for a living. I write violent fiction for a living. One of the things that we often have to square with ourselves is that we're writing violent fiction in a violent world. There are times I sit down at the keyboard, and then when I pop in to check Twitter, my writing day is ruined because of some horrible thing that happened somewhere else that sends shockwaves through your social media pages and through your day. And so I wanted to write something that could capture that a little bit. And so with Red Right Hand, Michael Hendricks, hitman of hitmen, is tasked with protecting a former federal witness, long thought dead, who resurfaces in a viral video in the wake of a terror attack. I had this notion, the scene that I'm going to read for you today. I didn't know anything about this book, except that I had this idea about a man in hiding who turns up on a viral video. And like it goes around the world in hours, and suddenly he's outed. Now, I write thrillers, so it wasn't going to be a cat video. It had to be something, punchy. And so one of the things I wanted to do as well is look at, when we see these sorts of, whether it's a serial bomber in Austin or a mass shooting or a terror attack, we see these ripples, right? Like we see it on the global scale from a distance, but then there's also those ripples within a community. You see, and it's the same with natural disasters, with hurricanes. You see these stories of heroism or of opportunism that happen at ground zero that only sort of start to come out long after the fact. I'm thinking about the guys in Puerto Rico who went around and robbed a bunch of ATMs because they knew nobody would be out protecting them. I'm thinking of the people in Houston. There was a woman who was trapped in a second-story apartment, and she went into labor, and the rest of the building created a human chain to pass her to a military vehicle so that they could get her to a hospital. Those sorts of stories that you only hear about after the fact. I wanted to write something that encapsulated what that's like at ground zero of these sorts of events, And so I had this image, much like the image of the assassin in the window. And I didn't know where it was going to go or how it was going to play out, but I knew it was going to be the beginning of the book. And so that's what I'm going to read for you guys today, the opening of Red Right Hand. And thankfully, since it's the opening of Red Right Hand, and since it's a cold open featuring no series characters, I don't have to explain a darn thing ahead of time. Excuse my Marco Rubio moment here. I'm apparently not qualified for public office because I do need to drink on occasion. Jake Reston's gaze traveled from the yellowed photo in his hand to the squat brick structure of Fort Point, jutting into San Francisco Bay and the Golden Gate Bridge looming above it. Then he frowned and shook his head. His wife, Emily, sighed. Still no good? Their youngest squirmed in her arms and let out a cry. Emily rocked her idly to settle her. Sophia's hungry. She's going to get cranky if I don't feed her soon. We're getting closer, Jake replied. Looks like we're maybe 10 yards off, 20 at most. You said that half an hour ago, Emily said wearily. She looked as tired as she sounded. She'd been averaging an hour or two of shut-eye a night since they left home a week ago. Apparently Sophia didn't sleep well in hotels, which meant neither did Emily. I know. I'm sorry. This time I mean it. Emily pursed her lips but said nothing. Hannah, their eldest at 13, rolled her eyes and plucked her cell phone from her pocket. At least their middle child, Aiden, who was at present twirling in place with his arms out while making airplane noises, seemed content to let his dad fritter away the last Saturday of summer vacation. Just a little longer, guys, I promise. Uh-huh, said Hannah without looking up from her phone. You know, he said, gesturing toward the crowded overlook behind them, some people actually come here of their own accord. They're probably just waiting to see somebody jump, Hannah muttered. Aiden stopped spinning. His face lit up with glee. They let you jump off the bridge into the water? No, Jake and Emily said in unison, a moment of parental telepathy. Your sister was just kidding, Emily added, flashing Hannah a stern look. No, I'm not. She waved her cell phone at her mother. It says here 1,600 people have leapt off it to their deaths since it first opened. A record 46 in 2013 alone. Aiden's expression turned worried. Wait, the people who jumped died? Don't listen to her, buddy. She's just messing with you. Hannah, stop being morbid. Come on, Jake said, heading farther down the path. I think the photo was taken over here. The photo was of Jake's parents. Jake's favorite picture of them, in fact. 40 years ago next month, they'd driven down the coast from Eugene on their honeymoon and asked a passerby to snap the shot. Jake thought it would be cute to stop off on the way home from Disneyland and recreate the photo as a video to wish his parents a happy anniversary, but it had proved harder than anticipated. First, they got stuck in the Bay Area's brutal traffic. Then the city was socked in with morning fog. Once the fog burned off, Jake had trouble finding the right spot. It was no wonder Emily's patience was wearing thin. Now, though, things were looking up. The day was clear and bright. The sky behind the bridge was a field of blue, unbroken save for the gulls that circled overhead. A lone tugboat chugged across the choppy bay. The temperate ocean breeze dashed the surf against the rocks, and sea spray cast fleeting rainbows at the water's edge. It looked like a postcard come to life. Jake raised a hand to halt his family and checked his view against the photo again. This time he smiled. "Gather up, guys, we're here." "Finally," Hannah said. "Hannah," her mother chastised, more out of reflex than disagreement. "What? We've been walking forever." Jake patted his pockets, looking for his phone. It wasn't there. He cursed under his breath. Emily shot him a look that could have stopped a city bus. "Don't tell me you left it in the car." "Okay," he said, "I won't tell you." Normally she found his goofy sense of humor charming. Today, though, she didn't seem amused. Hannah held her cell phone out. "Here, use mine. Your camera app sucks anyway." "Thanks, kiddo," Jake said, not remembering until her expression darkened that she'd asked him not to call her that anymore. He opened her camera app and toggled it to video. Then he took a big step backward, trying to fit everyone into the shot. "Hayden, squeeze in closer to your mom. Em, Sophia's got her fingers in her nose again. Hannah, no bunny ears, okay? Once I start recording, I'll count down from 3 and we'll all yell happy anniversary." "Dad," Hayden said, "aren't you gonna get in here with us?" "I'd love to, buddy, but someone's gotta work the camera." "But Nana and Papa had a stranger take their picture." You know, Jake thought, the kid had a point. He looked around for someone to hit up, but his prospects were slim. Then he spotted an older gentleman moving their way. His face was pallid, his gait halting. Despite the day's warmth, he wore a tweed driving cap and khaki trousers, an argyle sweater over a collared shirt. His clothes hung baggily around his scrawny frame, like dry cleaning on a wire hanger. Jake thought he looked lonely, the kind of guy who might feed pigeons in the park. "Excuse me, sir. Would you mind holding my daughter's phone so my family can record an anniversary message for my parents? It'll only take a second, I swear." The man looked at the phone and then at Jake. His eyes were the pale blue of faded denim. "Sorry," he said, "but I ain't much for gadgets. I got no idea how to work that thing." "That's fine. I can press record. All you have to do is point it." He thumbed the button on the screen and held the phone out to the man. The man hesitated for a moment, as if searching for a way to decline politely. Then he shrugged and shuffled over. When he took Hannah's ridiculous bedazzled phone from Jake, he did so gingerly, as if it might break. Jake trotted over to his family, tousled Aiden's hair, turned to face the camera. He put his arms around Hannah and Emily. "Are we all in the shot?" The old man peered into the phone's camera lens as if it were a viewfinder. "I don't know," he said. "I can't see shit." Aiden giggled. Emily reddened and gave Jake a gentle elbow to the ribs. Jake forced a smile and said, "I think you're holding it backward." "What? Oh, hell." He turned the phone around. "There you are. Wait, does that mean I'm on your video now?" "Don't worry, we can cut that bit when we get home. You ready, guys?" One by one, all save the baby murmured their assent. 3, 2, 1. But they never did record their message, because that's when the tugboat slammed into the bridge's south tower and exploded. The problem with that scene is I had absolutely no idea what happened next. But what's fun about that is, if I don't know, I feel like the audience couldn't possibly know either. In fact, it always cracks me up. I'm not somebody who plots my books ahead of time. And so whenever I get a review that says, "Oh, I saw the end coming a mile away," I always want to write them and say, "Seriously? I didn't." I had no idea how it was going to end. But in this case, what I really lucked out with was I had that image of a tugboat hitting the Golden Gate Bridge and causing damage. It doesn't come down, and spoiler for the people in the audience, the family does survive, otherwise that video would never make it onto the internet. But what I found as I started diving into the research for the book is just what a cool setting the San Francisco side of the bridge is right now. Because it actually cuts straight through the Presidio, which is an old army base, but now it's this weird hybrid trust where it's actually a little bit public park. In fact, it is, it's a national park, but it's also run by the Presidio Trust, which rents the old base housing out to obscenely wealthy people who basically want to live in a little oasis of green amid one of the most expensive cities in America. And so I had this idea of the gentleman who gets caught on that camera getting stuck within a cordon as they lock down this area of the attack. And there are people coming for him. And he has nowhere to go. And for Hendricks to protect him, he has to wade into the middle of the largest investigation since September 11th. And he himself is a wanted man. And that just provided so many opportunities for me to tell a really thrilling story, I hope, in a setting that I've never seen done before. So hopefully, it's not for me to say whether or not I was successful, but hopefully you think that I did. So that's about all I got. If anybody has any questions, I would be happy to answer them. Or I can just sit here and awkwardly drink water while on camera. So please save me from myself, potential questioners. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and if anybody would like a signed copy of anything, I will absolutely be happy to do that.